Hey everyone, this is Ben Norton, and you are watching or listening to the Multipolarista podcast. And I am always privileged to be joined by one of my favorite guests, Michael Hudson, one of the greatest economists living today. We're going to be talking about the inflation crisis. This is a crisis around the world, but especially in the United States. Inflation has been at over 8%, and it's caused a lot of political problems. It's very likely going to cause the defeat, well, among other factors, the defeat of the Democrats in the midterm elections in November. And we've seen that the response of the U.S. government and top economists in the United States is basically to blame inflation on wages, on low levels of unemployment, and on working people. We've seen that the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has said that inflation is being caused by wages supposedly being too high. We've also seen that the top economist and former Clinton administration official Larry Summers has claimed that the solution to inflation is increasing unemployment, potentially up to 10%. So today I'm joined by economist Michael Hudson, who's been calling out this kind of neoliberal snake oil economics for many years. And Professor Hudson has an article he just published that we're going to talk about today. You can find this at his website, which is michael-hudson.com. It's titled, "The Fed's Austerity Program to Reduce Wages." And I'm going to let Professor Hudson summarize the main points of his article. But Professor Hudson, as always, it's a pleasure having you. Can you respond to the decision by the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates by 0.75%. It doesn't sound like a lot. It's less than 1%, but it was the largest rate hike since 1994. And now we've already seen reports that there's going to be a depression. The Fed chair is blaming it on wages. Can you just respond to the position of the Fed and the inflation crisis in the U.S. right now?
For the Fed, the only two things that it can do is, number one, raise the discount rate, the interest rate, and number two, spend $9 trillion buying stocks and bonds and real estate mortgages to increase real estate prices and to increase the amount of wealth that the wealthiest 10% of the population has. To the wealthiest 10%, especially the 1%, it's not only inflation, inflation that's a problem of wages. Every problem that America has is a problem of the working class earning too much money. And if you're an employer, that's the problem. You want to increase your profits. And if you look at the short term, your profits go up the more that you can squeeze labor down. And the way to to squeeze labor down is to increase what Marx called the reserve army of the unemployed. You need unemployment in order to prevent labor from getting most of the value of what it produces, so that the employers can get the value and pay that employer to the banks and the financial managers that have taken over corporate industry in the United States. You mentioned that while the Fed calls the inflation and blames it on labor, that's not President Biden's view. Biden keeps calling it the Putin inflation.
Make no mistake, inflation is largely the fault of Putin.
I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home. I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home. I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home.
If you want to get
Oh my God, that is hilarious.
And of course, what he really means is that the sanctions that America has placed on Russia have created a shortage of oil, gas, energy, and food exports. So it's really, we're in the Biden inflation.
And make no mistake, inflation is largely the fault of Putin.
I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home. I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home. I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home.
And the Biden inflation that America is experiencing is the result basically of America's military policy, its foreign policy, and above all, the Democratic Party's support of the oil industry, which is the most powerful sector in the United States, and which is guiding most of the sanctions against Russia, and the national security state that bases America's power on its ability to export oil or control the oil trade and of all the countries, and to export agricultural products. So if you look at what we're in the middle of right now, isn't simply a domestic issue of wage earners wanting higher salaries, which they're not particularly getting. Certainly the minimum wage has not been increased, but you have to put this in the context of the whole Cold War that's going on. The whole US and NATO confrontation of Russia has been a godsend, as you and I have spoken before, for the oil industry and the farm exporters. And this is the result is that the US dollar is rising against the euro, against sterling, and against global south currencies. Well, in principle, a rising dollar should make the price of imports low. So something else is at work. And what's at work, of course, is the fact that the oil industry is a monopoly, that most of the prices that have been going up are basically the result of a monopolization. In the case of food, by the marketing firms like Cargill and Archer McDaniels that buy most of the crops from the farmers. The irony is that while food prices next to oil prices are the major factor that's soaring, farmers are getting less and less for their crops. And yet farmers' costs are going up for fertilizer, up for energy, up for other inputs, so that you're having enormous profits on the Archer McDaniels and the food monopolists of the distributors, and enormous gains for the oil industry, and also, of course, for the military-industrial complex. So if you look at what's happening in the overall world economic system, you can see that this inflation is being engineered, and the beneficiaries of this inflation certainly have not been the wage earners by any stretch of the imagination. But the crisis that the Biden policy has created is being blamed on the wage earners instead of on the Biden administration's foreign policy and basically the U.S.-NATO war to isolate Russia, China, India, Iran, and the Eurasia generally.
Yeah, Professor Hudson, I want to talk about the increase in interest rates by the Fed. There's been a lot of attention to this, although, again, it's 0.75%, which is not that big, but it's, of course, going to have an outsized impact on the economy. In your article, again, this is your column at michael-hudson.com, the Fed's austerity program to reduce wages. You talk about the Fed's junk economics, and you note that banks, so you say that the idea behind raising interest rates by 0.75% is that raising interest rates will cure inflation by deterring borrowing to spend on the basic needs that make up the consumer price index. But you point out banks do not finance much consumption except for credit card debt, which is now less than student loans and automobile loans. Banks lend almost entirely to buy real estate, stocks and bonds, not goods and services. So you argue that one of the effects of this is that it's actually going to roll back home ownership in the United States. You note that the rate of home ownership has been falling since 2008. So can you expand on those arguments? What will be the impact of the increase of interest, the interest rates by the Fed?
Well, in order to get an economics degree, which is needed to work at the Fed or the Council of Economic Advisors, you have to take economics courses in the university. And all of the textbooks say that just what you quoted me is saying. They say the pretense is that banks actually play a productive role in society. by providing the money for factories to buy machinery and build plant and do research and development and to hire labor, and that somehow the money that banks create is all lent out for industrial economy, and that will enable companies to make more money that they'll spend on labor. And of course, as they spend more money on labor, that's supposed to bid prices up as the reserve army of the unemployed is depleted. But that's all a fiction. The textbooks don't want to say that banks don't play a productive role like that at all. And the corporations don't do what the textbooks say. You just pointed, if you look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet and statistics that it publishes every month, you'll see that 80% of bank loans in the United States are mortgage loans for commercial real estate and mostly for home real estate. And of course, the home mortgage loans have been nothing like under 1% for the last 14 years since 2008. Only the banks and the large borrowers, the financial sector, have been able to borrow at these low rates. Homeowners all along have had to pay very high rates, just under 4%, and now it's going above 4%, heading to 5%. Well, here's the situation that the Federal Reserve has created. Suppose that you're a family right now going out to buy a home, and you find out that in order to borrow the money to buy the home, because nobody, if the average home in America costs $600,000 or $700,000, people haven't saved that much. The only way you can buy a home is to take out a mortgage. Well, you have a choice. You can either rent a home, or you can borrow the money to buy a home. And traditionally, for a century, the carrying charge for financing a home with a mortgage has been about the equivalent of paying a rent. The advantage is, of course, that you get to own the home when it's over. Well, now let's look at what's happening right now. All of a sudden, the carrying charge of mortgages have gone way, way up. The banks are making an enormous gap. They can borrow at just around 1%, and they lend out at 4.5%. They get a windfall gain of the markup they have in mortgages, lending to prospective homeowners. And of course, the homeowners don't have enough money to be able to pay the higher interest charge on the mortgages that they take out. So they are not able to buy as expensive a home as they want before. But they've been a declining part of the population. At the time Obama took office, about 68%, over 68% of Americans owned their own home. Obama started the great wave of eviction of 10 million Americans who lived in homes, essentially to throw them out of their homes, especially the victims of the junk mortgages, especially the lower income and racial minorities who were redlined and had to become the main victims of the mortgages. America's home ownership rate is now under 61%. What's happened? You've had huge private capital firms come into the market thinking, wait a minute, we can now buy these properties and rent them out. And we can buy them for all cash. Unlike homeowners, we're multi-billionaires. Blackstone, BlackRock, you have these multi-billion-dollar funds, and they say, well, we can't make much money buying bonds or buying stocks that yield what they do today, now that the Federal Reserve has ground down interest rates. What we can do is make money as landlords. And so they've reversed the whole shift away from the 19th century landlordism to rental to economy and financialization and the wealthy classes making money on finance, to go back to making money as landlords. And so they are buying up these homes that American homeowners can't afford to buy, because when you raise the mortgage rate, that doesn't affect a billionaire at all, because the billionaire firm doesn't have to borrow money to buy the home. They have the $1 billion of their own money, of pension fund money, of speculative money, of the money of the 1% and the 10% to spend. So what you're having by the increasing the interest rates is squeezing homeowners out of the market and turning the American economy into a landlord-ridden rental economy instead of a homeowner's economy. That's the effect, and it's a windfall for the private capital firms that are now seeing that making money as landlords the old-fashioned way, it worked for 800 years under feudalism. It's coming back in style.
Yeah, Professor Hudson, you point out in this article at your website that more than 50% of the value of U.S. real estate already is held by mortgage bankers. And of course, that percentage is increasing and increasing. Now, you, Professor Hudson, have argued a point that I haven't seen many other people make, although it's an obvious correct point, which is that there has actually been a lot of inflation in the United States in the past several years, but that inflation was in the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate. We see that with the constant increase in real estate prices that go up every single year. Rent goes up every single year. The difference now is that there's also a significant increase in the consumer price index. And there was an interesting study published by the Economic Policy Institute, which is, a center-left think tank affiliated with the labor movement. They're not radicals, they're progressives, and they did a very good study, and they found, this was published this April, they found that corporate profits are responsible for around 54% of the increase of prices in the non-financial corporate sector, as opposed to unit labor costs only being responsible for around 8% increase. So they showed scientifically that over half of the increase of prices in the non-financial corporate sector, that is in the consumer price index, over half of that inflation is because of corporate profits. Of course, that's not the way it's discussed in mainstream media. That's not the way the Fed is discussing it all. We see Larry Summers saying that we need to increase inflation. Larry Summers, of course, was the Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton. He's saying that, he said the U.S. has to increase unemployment. The solution to inflation is increasing unemployment, even though these studies show that over half of inflation in the consumer price index is because of corporate profits. I'm wondering if you can comment on why so many economists, including people as revered as Larry Summers, refuse to acknowledge that reality.
Most economists need to get employment. And in order to be employed, you have to give a picture of the economy that reflects how well your employer helped society at large. You're not allowed to say that your employer is acting in ways that are purely predatory. You're not allowed to say that the employer does not earn an income. You talk about corporate profits, and the classical economists, if you were a free market economist like Adam Smith or David Ricardo or John Stuart Mill, these are monopoly rents. So what you call corporate profits are way above normal corporate rates of return, normal profits. They're economic rents from monopoly. And that's because about 10 or 15 years ago, the United States stopped imposing its anti-monopoly laws. It's essentially let monopolies concentrate markets, concentrate power, and charge whatever they want. And so once you've dismantled the whole legal framework that was put in place from the 1890s, from the Sherman Antitrust Act down through the early 20th century, the New Deal, once you've dismantled all of this state control, saying essentially what Larry Summers says is we're for a free market. A free market is one in which companies can charge whatever they want to charge for things. A free market is one without government regulation. A free market is one without government A free market is a weak enough government so that it cannot protect wage earners. It cannot protect voters. A democracy is a country where the bulk of the population, the wage earners, have no ability to affect economic policy in their own interest. A free market is one where instead of the government being the planner, Wall Street is the planner on behalf of the large industries that are basically being financialized. So you've had a transformation of the concept of what a free market is, a dismantling of government regulation, a dismantling of anti-monopoly regulation, and essentially, the class war is back in business. That's what the Biden administration is all about. And quite frankly, it's what the Democratic Party is all about, even more than the Republican Party. The Republican Party can advocate pro-business policies and pro-financial policies, but the Democratic Party is in charge of dismantling the legacy of protection of the economy that had been put in place for a century.